commanders on the ground. And you can give credit to President Obama for the strategy in the last year of his term, but that was the military commanders. But you have to give credit to President Trump for actually listening to them and getting the job done. And the thing that's interesting, too, going forward as we look at the global war on terror, this is a victory now, but this is not something that has been completely solved. And we're attacking terrorists in places like Somalia. We just learned that the number of bombings since Donald Trump took office have doubled in Somalia in partnership with the government there, the one that actually does exist, right, such as it is. So this is going to be something we continue to fight because of the nature of the threat that we face. But it's a huge victory, not only just for getting rid of ISIS, but also for the military to feel like they can finally do their job again.
Kennedy, are we going to have troops in Iraq and Syria forever?
I feel like we are, unfortunately, and Afghanistan as well. And that's why whenever we have good news, like the caliphate is 98% contained, you always have to wonder, what's the mission creep? What's the next step? What is the ultimate goal of the United States? And, of course, there are those who make the case that there are U.S. interests that have to be secured in those places. And I think that argument gets flimsier and flimsier. And the president said as much when he was campaigning. Obviously, the realities of governing are quite different. But the success of containing ISIS is something that has to be satisfying for him. But Katie's absolutely right. You know, we can't hang mission accomplished banners because this can go in so many different directions. Syria has already devolved into civil war. And we've seen places like Yemen and Libya in an absolute shambles. And, you know, I hope that the president continues to indulge his non-interventionist streak. And he has people around him who understand the cost of human life and the amount of money that we have spent overseas. The president has said that himself in regards to infrastructure spending and saying, hey, why are we spending $7 trillion in overseas wars when we should essentially be spending that here in this country, making our bridges and roads in better condition?
Nation building here at home, I believe, is the preferred phrase of the last two presidents. Tom.
I like the generals.
You like the you're pro-generals.
I mean, no. So when he would say, I'm going to trust
such a controversial stand.
I stand with the men and women in uniform. One of the big advantages of this is that it denies ISIS and the people who now call themselves ISIS a recruiting tool. Because when the myth of the caliphate was alive, right, they could say, we are building our own nation in the desert. We are going to make this pure thing, and the caliph will be restored and da-da-da-da-da. The physical defeat of it does deny them a recruiting point, but to everybody's point, this is really metastasized online. This is really everywhere.
It's a digital caliphate.
Yes. Although that's why winning is important. I mean, Trump is all about winning, and it's true. As regards ISIS, the more wins you rack up, the better, you know, and it's down now. We want to keep snuffing it out and count up those victories. But I think this is an area where we do have bipartisanship. I mean, everybody hates ISIS, so we're kind of all together on that. I think people, you know, here I gave President Obama credit when he had success in that area. I also think it was great when he went back on his word and he kept Guantanamo Bay. Like, I was glad he broke that promise. I think when it gets down to it, a lot of times, you know, he ran against, he said, I'm going to close Guantanamo, I'm going to change our foreign policy. But then when he got in there, the foreign policy against ISIS wasn't that dramatically changed under President Obama. I think when these presidents get in there, they do take the advice of the generals. And so I think it's one area where there's a lot of bipartisanship, even though she disagrees with me, Kennedy.
With President Obama, because there were, from Bob Gates to people in the Pentagon, you know, anytime they left the administration, they talked about how difficult it was because they would lay out plans for defeating ISIS. And President Obama had his own ideas for how he wanted to do it.
Bob Gates wasn't there when ISIS really became a threat. I think Bob Gates had other issues with the administration. The problem that
Bob Gates' issues with the administration were echoed by members of the military who were very high up in the
But actually, I think the problem President Obama was trying to come up against is, to the United States military, every problem looks like a nail and every bomb looks like a hammer. And so there have to be other tools in the American toolbox.
That's not insulting and oversimplifying anything.
But there have to be other tools to go after threats. And I think he ran on...
That's right. He used droning, which killed many more civilians.
He ran on ending the war in Iraq. He ran on getting out of Afghanistan.
ISIS, by the way,
I'm not saying those are good policy decisions, although I happen to agree with them. We were coming out of we are still in the longest war in America's history in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And we have no end in sight to when these men and women are coming home.
President Obama had 8 years to end that war.
And he didn't. And I'm not saying that was okay. My point is we have to look at American power, not just as bombs, but as diplomacy, as our economic power, as trade deals.
Well, but that did not work very well when it came to ISIS, the bombing of ISIS over the past year.
We bombed a lot of them too.
Is it a reasonable question to ask? What becomes of Bashar al-Assad? What becomes of Syria?
Absolutely.
It's great to have ISIS. It's great to have the people that, as Tom points out, everyone in the world universally hates.
Well, and
these guys are the New York Yankees of being hated.
Right, and there are serious questions now, too, about ISIS actually joining the ranks of the Iraqi government in places where it is not stable. So there's always another problem that we're going to have to deal with.
Which will require diplomacy and won't just require military action.
When it comes to diplomacy and talking with ISIS,
with the Taliban in Afghanistan.
What has worked over the past year is taking out terrorists, bombing more, and taking off the rules of engagement. But in terms of how we move forward, you talked about these guys going to Europe, the ones that are left who haven't been killed. That comes down to domestic policy. That is when foreign policy, whether it's in Europe or the United States, turns into domestic policy and how we deal with our borders, how we deal with vetting of refugees who come through a stream without any kind of background, and online radicalization in these areas that have not assimilated.
Okay, there is one area where I absolutely agree with Marie, and that is, I think we have to be more mindful than ever of, what I refer to as the digital caliphate.
Right.
It's people who have scattered, the 45,000 fighters who were fighting with ISIS. Those people who are now, they're down to 1,000. That means you've got 44,000 conceivably, at least the ones who aren't dead. Yeah, and they have gone to places in Western Europe, and they are here in the United States. And they are radicalizing in ways that we have seen here in New York City with 2 terror attacks this year.
Or you don't even have to travel there anymore. It used to be you could track someone's travel and it was a red flag. You don't even have to. You can go online.
Tom, do we end up with regime change? Are we going to end up orchestrating regime change in Syria, do you think?
Well, there's another example of, you say the presidents get flexible when they get into office.
Real flexible.
President Trump, he changed his view on Syria. Remember, he came in and he says, we're not going to,
What do I care? Yeah.
Yeah. And then how long did it take him to start bombing Syria? So he changed. Presidents change when they get in here. That's why you got to trust the generals. That's why you take politics.
Do we end up confronting Russia, and do we end up taking out Assad, or does he stay?
Well, maybe if we can get this investigation to come to a close, then we can focus on the real Russia.
Maybe Trump offers Mueller a deal. Let me off the hook. I'll take out Assad. Do you think we end up taking out Assad?
If you listen to the left, we're not fighting against Russia. We're fighting with Russia. So we're a puppet of the Soviet regime, and we do whatever Putin wants.
Well,
we're not taking out.
There's also a proxy war going on, and this is all about the Iranians. So it's not just about Bashar al-Assad. It's about the Iranians being now the focus of this administration.
So you think he stays?
I don't know. I'm not going to predict that, but I do know that the administration is very focused on Iran and making sure that they don't creep in more than
somebody once said that Bashar al-Assad's days were numbered.
That was
technically everyone's days are numbered.
Red line.
Technically, everyone's days are numbered.
Aren't they? Yes. Last word.
The problem has always been if Assad's not there, what fills that void?
Right.
That's always been the problem.
The
look at Libya, look at Yemen. And it's going to be Giancarlo Stanton.
Ahead, when Harry met Barry. A very interesting interview conducted by the Prince with the ex-president. That's next.
This program is brought to you.
Well, here's something you don't see every day. A prince interviewing a president. The BBC releasing an interview conducted by Prince Harry with former President Barack Obama. Some interesting exchanges. We have the highlights, beginning with what sounded like a veiled swipe at Mr. Obama's successor over his use of social media.
All of us in leadership have to find ways in which we can recreate a common space on the internet. One of the dangers of the internet is that people can have entirely different realities. They can be just cocooned in information that reinforces their current biases. It's also, by the way, harder to be as obnoxious and cruel in person as people can be anonymously on the internet.
But the president isn't anonymous on the internet. Mr. Obama never mentioned President Trump by name, but one could imagine he had him in mind. Here's another clip. How 44 felt handing over the presidency to 45.
You've sat through the inauguration with your game face on, not giving much emotion away, as we all saw. What's going through your mind?
You know, the first thing that went through my mind was sitting across from Michelle, how thankful I was that she had been my partner through that whole process, and that we hadn't fundamentally changed, I think was a satisfying feeling. Now, that was mixed with all the work that was still undone and concerns about how the country moves forward. But you know, overall, there was a serenity there, more than I would have expected.
There's nothing more serene than the feeling of your entire legacy coming undone.
Right before your eyes.
Do you believe that he really felt serene knowing that the president that had just been inaugurated was about to undo many of his regulations and go for his
probably did not
signature
feel
after
well, but he may have gotten those emotions out on election night when I'm sure he was not very happy with Hillary Clinton for blowing it, right?
Oof.
But I'm just wondering if he brought the prince an iPod full of his speeches, as he did with the Queen. Wondering how I'm sad he wasn't asked about whether he's happy about the Churchill bus being back in the White House. But here are some things that actually are dangerous about social media that I want to remind President Obama of. The first thing, inviting a woman who bathed herself in milk and Fruit Loops in her bathtub to do an interview of you in the White House. That's one. The second is selfie sticks. President used a lot of those. And the third was, remember when the Osama bin Laden news broke? It happened on Twitter first, not through the White House. So that's also dangerous.
Oh, very interesting. But President Obama was very adept with social media. And in fact, when he was running against Senator McCain in 2008, it was his use of the Facebook, which really put him over the top, particularly with younger, digitally minded voters. So isn't it a little hypocritical for him to be attacking the president?
Well, first of all, he didn't attack the president. And if you just listen to what he said, nothing he said is controversial. The internet can be a swamp full of horrible things said about all of us. It happens all the time. And it does make people just listen to what they already believe. That's also not good. Nothing he said is controversial. I truly think that he is concerned about discourse and dialogue, and there are parts of the internet like Twitter that do not help it. I am fully on board with him on this.
It's not supposed to help it. The internet is not supposed to be completely sanitary and serene.
It is definitely achieved.
But it shouldn't push us off of platforms.
I wouldn't know. Work has so many firewalls.
Well, but it's not good for our discourse if people don't want to be on it because they're harassed or threatened. That's just not good for our discourse.
Well, maybe that has something to do with the kind of discourse that you engage in, Tom. I find the digital realm to be quite satisfying and engaging.
Absolutely. And this is the same song he's been singing for years and years. President Barack Obama wanted to always go back to the days when we had 3 networks telling his story. It always bothered him. That's why Fox News would stick in his craw so much, because Fox News was not always parroting the Obama line the way the rest of the media was.
Name-checked Fox News constantly.
Yes. So we are living in a wonderful world now where people actually have their own opinions and they can publish them. We all have
Even
phones.
If they're wrong,
the thing
or
is,
threatening,
this
or wrong.
Yeah, it's better than the old days when we all had to sit and trust Walter Cronkite.
Should be squashed. The government should really crack down on wrong ideas. That's exactly what you're saying.
What I'm saying is we don't have facts anymore on key policy issues to debate over. Am I totally outnumbered here, Sarah Walt?
Look, I think that the promise of social media has largely not been met. And
how do you get your news?
Social media. Look,
is it all fake?
And the Fox News channel.
I'm saying the promise has not been met. That doesn't mean that it won't be met in time. The single greatest challenge, arguably, facing our culture and, by extension, our republic today is how do we deal with this medium? What regulations are appropriate? Do we approach it from an antitrust perspective with the big companies that control it, like Facebook, like Google? Do we approach it from... I think we probably end up with antitrust measures, is what I think, to ensure some competition.
There's plenty of competition. That's the wonderful thing about the internet. I think that's what's so frustrating for the president. Is there such a great proliferation, and half of it disagrees with him fundamentally? And that's what's frustrating to him, because he feels he's right. He feels that his beliefs and opinions are objectively true. That is not correct. And therefore, anything that runs counter to his deeply felt beliefs must be inherently wrong or flawed.
The amount of anonymity and the amount of the nasty climate that all that anonymity breeds. So the anonymity has value, right?
The
People are
president
free-
does not operate anonymously online, though.
The current president.
Yes.
I don't, maybe I'm naive. I did not read Obama talking about Trump specifically there, or that as a veiled swipe at Trump. I thought that was just a generalized lament.
Agree.
I did not read him going
Did
after
you read
Trump.
it into the questions the prince was asking every time? 2017 has been a very, very tough
You
year.
must feel-
How do you feel about it?
I think there's one instructive. I mean, I think for me,
Isn't it your birthright
It's
to
when,
continue the
it's when
presidency?
these conspiracy theories that are totally false have the ability to jump out of the internet and into real life. And by that I mean the Pizzagate, where someone walked with an automatic weapon into a pizza parlor a mile from my house and could have killed people because of something stupid and false that he read on the internet.
Imagine if
That
something
is
like
what
Okay,
he's
but I
talking
think
about.
that has
Gain
more to do
traction,
with the mental
like maybe-
stability of someone like that than,
Okay.
you know, the internet had some questionable things on there, therefore it should be
Before
illegal.
the internet,
and we
you
should
would
only
never
have
have been
3
able to do
network
that.
choices.
Before
The end.
before the internet, there was unpleasant discourse as well.
Kookism was
The
real.
internet certainly magnifies that. However, it's a choice. Look, there are things on the internet that are said every single day that are horrible. Twitter is a cesspool of disgusting things that are said on a regular basis. That is true. But it's also like the First Amendment. There are things that are said not on the internet, and there are prices to pay for those freedoms. And the question does become, how do we regulate these things?
Right.
Yeah.
Who are the people who in government who decide what's okay to be said,
Too much
what's not
regulation,
okay
we
to be
lose it.
said?
If you
Too little
threaten
regulation.
someone with violence, that's a crime.
There are
But that
risks
law
to everything
Or
and consequences
should our
for everything.
political leaders, though, should we look to them to set a better example than President Trump has?
Or maybe Barack Obama, who is a very divisive
We're not talking about
figure
Barack
in
Obama. We're
American
talking about
politics.
President Trump.
He's the
Well,
one
we're
who did
talking
the
about Barack
interview.
Obama because he was the one who did the interview. Of course we're talking
President
about it.
Trump bullies people on Twitter, online, repeatedly. He has brought down the level of our discourse with his Twitter
How do you think
usage.
a Fox News reporter felt when he was being bullied by the Obama
how do you
administration?
think
When
I
he was
feel some
being
days on
followed
Fox?
around by the Justice Department and, you know,
Again, we
phone
can
calls.
criticize Barack Obama and criticize Donald Trump. We're allowed to do both at the same time.
I agree.
Okay.
Some of us actually do.
Stipulate,
Amazing.
yes.
Stipulated.
Stipulated
So
for the
noted.
record.
Well, President Trump and his continued rift with the FBI, well, it was just turned up a notch. We'll have that next, right here.
President Trump, as you know, isn't very happy with the FBI these days. He's at Mar-a-Lago tweeting again and again that the Bureau is tainted, still fired up about the investigation into his campaign's possible ties to Russia. Watergate reporter Carl Bernstein takes great issue with that, saying it's not the FBI that's tainted.
There's only one institution that really has been tainted through these months, and that is the Trump presidency. It's tainted by the president's lies, by his disrespect for American institutions operating under the law, with traditional American democracy and the instruments thereof. If the president is as confident as he says that this investigation is going to end very soon, and with him being exonerated, he ought to welcome all this instead of attacking constantly. He's doing a grave disservice to our democracy.
Well, I agree with some of the things, not everything, that Carl Bernstein just said. But, Chris, I'm coming to you first on this. It does seem like President Trump almost enjoys pushing institutions to the limit. I think a lot of his supporters liked that he was going to come in and shake up Washington, drain the swamp. Do you think this is taking it a step too far in really going after the FBI as they're investigating him?
Well, you can look at it a couple of ways. Now, number one, Carl Bernstein, Lordy day.
Right.
I mean,
Man.
Bob
A little much.
I was on Fox News Sunday with Bob Woodward on Sunday. He's measured, he's smart, he has a good perspective on this.
Yeah.
Bernstein his former stablemate has embraced like a full plutonium, the wires are alive. So I think I might discount some of his POV.
But that being said,
All that having been said, look, the president has a strategy, and his supporters and defenders have a strategy, which is that whatever the FBI and Robert Mueller come up with, they want his core group of supporters to say, doesn't matter, it's not credible, The FBI is shot through with Democrats. It is crooked, and I don't believe what they say, and I'm sticking with my man. So this is all pre-buttal, so that whatever comes out at the end, that Republicans will, or Trump's Republicans will stick with him, whatever the findings are, because you are impeaching the witness in advance.
Which is going to look really silly if Robert Mueller actually ends up exonerating the president. And so there are some ways to walk around this. But that being said, there is a serious issue at the top levels of the FBI. We have it in black and white with the text messages, not only people talking about it politically, but if an official government office being used to talk about some kind of insurance policy. And I think it's legitimate that people have questions about what exactly that meant. Now, Christopher Wray, the new FBI director, has an obligation to go through, remind his agents, especially the top brass working around him, that politics cannot impede any of your investigations and none of your decisions can be made based on how you feel about particular candidates and what they are saying. And he has an obligation to do it in a transparent way so that the American people as a whole, not Trump's ardent base supporters, but the American people as a whole, can regain some kind of confidence in the FBI. Because I've talked to a number of people on the left as well who say these messages that have come to light are actually alarming to them in terms of how this is handled and maybe some of the biases that happened during the Obama administration, not to hold Democrats accountable in the same way that Republicans are being held accountable. And that's a fair thing to be asking.
I think, and we talked about this earlier on Outnumbered, I also think I've heard from FBI colleagues that I used to work with when I was in government who said, look, these text messages are terrible. They look bad. He was taken off of the investigation. There's a lot of us who are working here who are nonpartisan, who work under Democrats and Republicans, who feel like the president and his supporters are somehow attacking all of our credibility.
Why?
And because are you joking? Or are you being sarcastic?
I am joking. I don't care about the great men and women of the FBI. They keep going back to that. It's the leadership and the people who are running the investigation stink. We see their texts. We see that they're biased.
I think it's really important to make that differentiation.
But you're not making a differentiation. You think we should.
I think there is a differentiation. I think Katie pointed that out on Outnumbered earlier today. There is a difference between people who work in law enforcement, who have sworn to protect and defend the United States Constitution, who believe in the rule of law, and who work their tails off day in and day out. And
but
then
he's not going after. President Trump isn't saying
no, but then I think there are some
the FBI is tainted.
There are some people at the top who unfortunately have so much influence over the frustrated and hardworking people on the lower levels.
Are you talking here about
of the
Stop being frustrated. Go do your work. I don't know what the problem is. We're seeing at the top, it's rotten.
Who's at the top? Can say
Who's
it. Rotten at the
Who's
top?
rotten?
Stroke.
He's not at the top.
He's not the top.
He was.
He's
He was the guy
at the top.
All of these.
McCabe is
how many
questionable for sure.
examples do we have?
But you don't have any evidence that these personal political views have influenced ongoing investigations. That's what's being looked into right now.
But we do have evidence that it may have had a significant impact on
the loss of my trust. And I don't know why he has to sit there with tape over his mouth. I think President Trump should say, I don't like it. I don't like that with these guys. I think, if he sees bias, he should say it. I don't know why he has to just sit there like a bull in the bull ring and keep getting.
Here's why it's different, because
believe in this stuff.
It's one thing if you're an outside analyst just sort of looking at everything, commenting on it. And a lot of people, that's what they do all day long. They read the news, they watch the news, and they form an opinion, and they talk about it with their friends. It's very different when you're a part of the story and you're the one who's actually affecting the outcome of the measurement. And you are the one who's being measured at the same time.
We have seen both parties over the past 50 years take issue with the FBI, whether it was trying to get Martin Luther King to commit suicide or any number of things that have happened. So I'm not saying that the agency is beyond reproach or it's beyond questioning.
Right.
But I do think this. I think that the American people can take comfort from the fact that on a basic level, our federal law enforcement agencies and our Justice Department are staffed by conscientious people who respect the rule of law, conscientious people who love the country more than their own political party. And I think that anything that we can say, of everything that we can say that America is, by and large, overwhelmingly well served by these agencies and by the
Do we know how those texts came to light? I'm still very curious.
The Inspector General, I believe.
IG found him because they fired him or they demoted him.
Right. Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, look at that.
So they're doing your phone.
I do want to say one more thing about what the FBI agents on the ground are actually doing. They are completely removed from politics and are working on things like child sex trafficking.
Yes.
And illicit drug use and child pornography and terrorism.
Yes.
And they're completely removed. So it is very important to distinguish who we're exactly talking about here when it comes to.
And they should be just as
getting
upset.
Some accountability.
They are
Rank and
upset.
file should say,
They
look,
were
I don't
upset.
like this
They are.
investigation.
The Hillary
It's tainting us.
investigation as well.
I'm untainted. I am untainted.
Amen.
All right.
Okay.
Sorry, well,
Coming up, Vanity Fair's getting some pushback for its new video mocking Hillary Clinton. The controversy up next. Stay close.
Our country.
Dreams stay with you like a lover's voice from the mountainside.
Hillary Clinton just won't go away, and staffers at Vanity Fair have some suggestions to keep her busy and out of politics.
It's time to start working on your sequel to your book, What Happened? What the hell happened?
Get someone on your tech staff to disable autofill on your iPhone so that typing an F doesn't become Form Exploratory Committee for 2020.
Take up a new hobby in the new year. Volunteer work, knitting, improv comedy, literally anything that'll keep you from running again.
To finally put away your James Comey voodoo doll. Now, we all know you think that James Comey cost you the election, and he might have, but so did a handful of other things. It's a year later, and time to move on.
So cheers to you, Hillary Clinton.
Cheers to you, Hillary.
Literally anything, please. Those New Year's tips for Hillary didn't go over well with some of her supporters, and there's been backlash on social media over the video, some calling it sexist, predictably, to suggest Hillary take up a hobby like knitting. The staffer who made that comment says they did snarky New Year's resolutions for a bunch of politicians, including President Trump, and a spokeswoman for Vanity Fair was contrite, saying it was an attempt at humor and we regret that it missed the mark. Tom Shalhoub, our resident knitter, is this sexist?
Not sexist. They did, she had a number of suggestions. She said knitting, which is, I guess, is associated with women. I'm not a sexist, so I don't know. He also suggested she take up comedy, an art form associated with men. So I think
that's sexist. I do not like that.
You're not helping. You're not helping.
Look, stop digging, Tom.
Look, I said yesterday on the show, Kennedy, did I not say they are saying lock her up now? The Democrats are chanting it about Hillary Clinton. They all want her to go away. Did you see those people? Could you see more typical Democrat Hillary supporters than those people?
No, they're not. These are millennials. This is a changing of the media guard. And these are people saying, please, whatever you do, don't run again because you are tanking the party. And so I have actually,
that's what I'm saying,
and this is something that I've been saying for some time, that Hillary Clinton is so desperate and embarrassing and lacks such self-awareness that she needs to go away and re-examine her life in private. But now I'm saying, after such a glorious year of making fun of her, she is such a great time. I hope she doesn't go anywhere. I hope she starts running for president in 2018 because she provides so much material. Hillary, please, wherever you are, stay in the limelight. You are a blast. It is an endless supply of jokes and barbs. So stick with it,
Chris. I think the saddest part of the story is that Vanity Fair somewhat apologized for the video, right? Isn't that terrible?
We were talking before about the cocoons that people in the internet era are able to keep for themselves. It's a thermostatically controlled 72 degrees. Everything, everything affirms your worldview.
That's what President Obama was saying with Prince Harry.
Everything reinforces what you think, and you only hear that you're right. The fact that this mild lampooning of, by the way, we should point out, the most disastrous national politician, 2 presidential elections, lost to the 2 most she lost twice. Once to a guy whose middle name was Hussein, and the other time to the host of The Celebrity Apprentice. She lost. She's the worst Democratic nominee since at least Dukakis.
She beat Rick Lazio. Don't you forget that.
That is true. She beat Rick Lazio. So here is this person. Obviously a target for ridicule, rightly a target for ridicule. And in this case, it's gentle mocking. It's gentle mockery. And the fact that that is too much, that this is just too hot a dose, we just can't possibly take this mocking, and and we have to dissect it on the basis of is knitting sexist, and oh my goodness, and on and on.
It's like a college course
study. I can't stand those base reactions, though. If you do something wrong, or if someone calls you on something, that person is not automatically racist or sexist.
Right. Marie?
I think that's
sexist. Your input
on
this
2018
explosive topic
is that I never, ever have to talk about Hillary Clinton on television again.
We have a couple days left, so
because it's frustrating, but also as a Democrat, but also because she's not the future of the party. And if Republicans who love making fun of her, and you're not Republicans,
and
who love making fun of her, and who love
Democrats are
talking
making fun
about
of her.
her, go into 2018 thinking we're going to relitigate 2016, they're going to be in for a big surprise come November, because there are a lot of new Democrats who are not Hillary Clinton Democrats. They're raising money. They're fired up. And so while this is funny, we're about to turn the page into a big election that is not going to be about the Clintons for the first
and
time
hopefully
in a long
there will
time.
be some new names and new faces that we could talk about and
I'm
actually
gonna talk about them until my face turns
ideas and
blue.
not political failures.
Well,
Chelsea.
speaking of a
I hate you right now.
shots fired. Okay, so speaking of a not so fresh face, fasten your seatbelts. Mariah Carey is returning to Times Square for a New Year's Eve redo after last year's disaster. How's that going to go next?
Falling down the mountain, and the distance.
It wasn't Mariah Carey's finest hour.
I'll just get through the motions, okay? All right. We didn't have a check for this song, so we'll just say it went to number one. I'm going to say let the audience sing, okay?
Last year's New Year's Eve performance was a catastrophic mess, but everyone deserves a second chance, right? Mariah is going to get one this Sunday when she returns to Times Square for a redemption performance on Dick Clark's Rockin' Eve. Wow, Kennedy, Mariah Carey, I don't know, am I the only one who thinks that wasn't that bad of a performance? She had technical issues.
Well, here's what I will say. Jesse Waters and I will be hosting an All-American New Year right here on the Fox News Channel starting at 10 p.m. Eastern on Sunday night. We will be in Times Square. Last year, as Mariah Carey walked by me, I said, "Hello, Mariah," and looked her in the eye, and she looked as though the ghost of MTV Past had clutched her around the neck and wouldn't let go. She looked so terrified and discombobulated that I think that might have been the cause of her bad performance.
It freaked her out.
So what I need to do is Jesse and I need to find her beforehand and give her a nice,
Positive
friendly,
vibes,
positive, emotional massage so she's able to go out
you should give her a
and
jacket.
complete the work that she started. And you know, it's going to be like minus 25.
Is
So
it
I
true
don't
that-
think she'll be in the sequin
Is
body.
it true that that's
more
what
than that.
Jesse's wearing this year? That's what the internet said.
We do have
That's what I heard.
a Mariah-inspired outfit for
Spangled
this year's
nude body
All-American New
stocking.
Year.
Yes.
I think Kennedy should leave the emotional massaging to Jesse. What do you think about that?
I
Jesse is
feel like
very
there's no
good
good
at
answer.
therapy.
I feel like there's no good answer.
There's no way to
There's
answer
no
that.
good answer.
You know, I think
love
that
Mariah,
we're her good luck charm.
I love Mariah when she actually sings. I mean, those poor people stood out in Times Square in the cold to hear the audience singing.
It's going to be even colder this year.
Did you ever try? You go outside and you do these things. There are technical issues.
Okay,
It's hard.
Someday, if we just forget what we're saying on the show, and I'm just going to wander around and say we didn't practice.
I'm glad she is getting a second chance.
Thank you.
This is America. We believe in redemption.
Right, and she'll do
She's getting a
beautifully.
second chance. She'll do a good job, but she should dress appropriately because it'd be harder to sing when it's so cold.
Wouldn't it be great if she dresses like the kid in The Christmas Story?
Well,
What if
then
she just
can't have her mic.
She should.
Right, guys, we're all
It'd be a little
forgetting the key
difficult.
question. Why doesn't she just lip sync?
Well, there
Well,
was
you
a-
can hear there's a track behind her with the dog whistle.
She cannot. No, she can no longer sing those super high notes, Marie. But the thing is,
Didn't you hear her voice like, all right, we've
I
got
do.
some technical problems. All right, I don't know if anyone can hear this, but
She had a
this
cold a
soprano
couple of
ain't going
years
to sing
ago,
itself.
and she was raspy. But it's difficult. It's hard to sing outside. My sympathy
you gonna
tends to go with the performers. I wouldn't mind. But the thing is,
he's available.
People, they have we have earpieces. People talk to us during the show. Don't
Is
they?
that who's been talking in my head
They're called
the whole
ear
time?
monitors, and she said that hers were on the fritz. They were not working. But then she and her publicist at the time accused Dick Clark Productions of sabotaging her ear monitors. And why would we do that?
Right.
We would much rather you have a great performance. We don't want people talking about how you were an unprofessional slob on the stage.
Was it Beyonce who messed up the national anthem
That was Roseanne Barr.
Beyonce can do no wrong.
No, at the inauguration.
Beyonce did a great
Beyonce
national
would mess
anthem,
it up
but
on
then it was
purpose.
revealed that she was lip syncing. And again, all the power to them. It's hard to sing outside. Did you ever try to sing
And that was
national anthem?
a very
Difficult.
frigid
Freezing
day.
cold.
Yes.
People were absolutely freezing cold. Whitney Houston did the same thing in 1991 because she wanted to make sure, in case the audio went out, that she had one pre-recorded, and it was absolutely beautiful. She recorded it in the stadium.
And you got Maverick and Iceman flying over your head. It's hard.
They're buzzing the tower. You're spilling coffee on yourself.
There's a lot happening right now.
Tune in and watch Kennedy and Jesse. On
That's
BBC.
your real takeaway.
One more thing is up next.
Critics are all...
It's time now for one more thing. Marie, Katie, Tom, Chris, that's me, Kennedy.
I'll go first.
You want to go first?
Sure. So this is the plane to nowhere. Chrissy Teigen and her husband, John Legend. John Legend, who is also a Buckeye, like I am, were stuck on a plane heading from L.A. to Tokyo when it was turned back because an unauthorized person was on board. Apparently this happens